a C. I don't know if we were grading Terry on our report, but it wouldn't be a very good grade. What's your reactions? Any surprises there? Thoughts on root causes of this issue?
To me, I think it's important to note that in disruptive strategies, it's not always technology. Disruptive strategies have been around for a long time. If you think back to the 80s and 90s, in retail, Walmart supercenters disrupted grocery. Costco came in, category killers. Sabre and Expedia changed the airline reservation approaches. But today, in this environment, I think there are some things that are different in terms of the frequency and the scale of some of the issues and the trends in development that Terry mentioned. And it's because the entrepreneurs that are attacking now, I don't think are actually in the industry like they were in the past. They're outsiders with very different economics and very different operating models. And that poses a real threat to folks who are not sensitive and aware of some of those trends. So that would be one reaction.
Yeah. And I would say that, for an incumbent today, that risk is probably amplified because these new entrants, new competitive threats are coming from the outside. And certainly one of the big changes in technology has been just the constant reduction in price. So the barrier to entry in terms of the complexity of the technology or the cost of the technology has significantly reduced and continues to do so. So it just adds additional pressure to a lot of new innovative thought that's coming in because the tools are much cheaper and much simpler.
Yeah, if you think, Michael, to your point, social media has significantly lowered the cost of customer acquisition and brand building, so people can scale up quite quickly. And to your point, the cloud really has lowered the barriers, so people don't need to invest in the service and the infrastructure they needed to in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to your point, this is not new disruption, whatnot, but perhaps it's the speed and scale that changes out there. Tim, your thoughts and reactions. Anything surprised you on those results?
Well, it's surprising that the lack of preparedness. I think that the numbers are quite startling, and I think that if people's takeaway is that we need to watch out for technology, that would be the wrong impression to take. I think the idea here is that there are a host of possibilities, and boards need to think much more than just about technological change, but about where else could someone come at us? What can we see in another industry that might apply in our industry? What's happening to another company that might happen to us, and how could we anticipate that and maybe even take advantage of a change as it occurs?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. It's more than technology that we need to look and cast it broadly in terms of what you're looking for. One of the things I'm always interested in is regulation, and what role does that play to either to hinder new developments, innovation, or alternatively, people hiding behind that. They'll say, listen, I'm protected by regulation. I don't have to worry about this. But your sense on that, and of course, the example is Uber. Everyone looks at Uber's approach seems to be, damn the regulators, we'll do this and deal with it after, and we're out to disrupt. But your thoughts around regulation and how people should be thinking about those things?
I think it can create complacency. And you have to be careful that you don't assume that it's always going to stay there if you're an incumbent. I mean, you look at the Uber example, and what does Uber really bring? It brings increased transparency in terms of, where your cab is, the driver, the ratings, et cetera. It gives you easier payment because they have your credit card. It gives you trackable record keeping, and it gives you expandable supply in terms of UberX. The first three things any cab company could have done, right? But because perhaps they were feeling like they were behind regulated, that there weren't that many degrees of freedom, it takes an outsider from outside the industry to really do something that if they had been sensitive to their customers and thinking of a better way, you could argue they might have come up with those innovations. So I think it can breed complacency, and I think, Terry, your message is we have to be careful that we're looking at those trends and applying them to our firms and their role and competitive position all the time.
I think the Uber example is an interesting one because as you mentioned, Don, I'm on the board of Intact Insurance, and many months ago, we took a better part of a day and talked about what are the implications of a shared economy. So this is a world where people use their condo and rent it out as part of Airbnb, or they drive their car as part of UberX and drive people around town, or relay rides where you drop your car off and somebody rents it out for you while you're in another town. And so in this shared economy, what's the role of an insurance company? All those algorithms that you talked about, they go right out the window because you're using your asset differently. What has transpired as a result of those discussions is that Intact has now announced that they're going to be the insurance provider to Uber. If this is where the world is headed, then we better get part of it, and that's what Intact has done with the Bel Air Direct brand, which is now the insurance provider to Uber.
Go ahead, Terry.
I think it's a great example, and I applaud Intact for thinking through the option and coming up with a new business model, because it forces you to challenge some of your traditional actuarial rules and regulations, and is a very different business model. We happen to be behind the scenes in some of those conversations and approached a number of the incumbent property and casualty companies, and none of them could quite get their head around, okay, I know how to insure individual private drivers. I don't know how to insure the sharing economy. And so hence you were able to take advantage of that. So incumbents had the opportunity and they chose not to. And I wish you the best. And based on number of rides that I and my family take on Uber, I think you'll do very well in the insurance process.
So perhaps some of the messages there, obviously you need to think about regulation, but don't hide behind regulation. And also I thought the point about getting ahead of issues as opposed to responding.